This is the story of a man who dedicated his life not only to fighting sati, the burning of widows, but social evil in all its manifestations. His admirers and detractors alike are at least agreed that he was the first modern Indian, the torch-bearer of the Indian Renaissance. His name, Ram Mohan Roy. In the words of Rabindranath Tagore, he was born at a time when our country, having lost its link with the inmost truths of its being, struggled under a crushing load of unreason, in abject slavery to circumstance. In social usage, in politics, in the realm of religion and art, we had entered the zone of uncreative habit, of decadent tradition, and ceased to exercise our humanity. Historically, the date of Ram Mohan Roy's birth, the 22nd of May, 1772, is also important, as it was in that year that the East India Company put an end to the sham of operating under the Mughal umbrella and took over direct power under Warren Hastings. Ram Mohan Roy was born in the village of Radhanagar, where his father was a rich landlord. His family were Kulin, the highest order of Brahmins. His grandfather was chief of different districts during the rule of Muhabbat Jung, Nawab of Murshidabad. His father, Ramakant Roy, was referred to by the collector of Burdwan as a man of property whose revenue was lakhs of rupees, the most respectable man in the district. Ram Mohan Roy's memories are sometimes revealed in sketches he wrote for an autobiography. The painful nature of his personal life. He was married at the age of 9. The child bride died, and 2 other wives were found for the little boy. He was educated at home and at the local school. The tragedy of his early education was that Hindu society had discarded the acharyas, the truly learned men, in favor of temple priests who recited only dogma and at the most taught only arithmetic. Ram Mohan was sent to Patna to study Arabic and Persian, which was the language of administration. It is difficult, when dealing with genius, to trace definite influences, because genius seems to have, in all ages, an intuitive grasp of a particular truth. But it seems likely that the monotheism of the Quran and the mystical Sufi belief of the oneness of man may have influenced Ram Mohan. Whatever the cause, when he returned to Radhanagar, there was a confrontation between father and son. Ram Mohan told his father that idolatry was the basic disease of the Hindu religion. His father reasoned with him, saying that idols were symbols. He tried to explain the philosophical basis of Hindu religious worship. But as his father Ramakant has recorded, whenever I spoke to my son, he always had a kintu, meaning but. And this kintu, this but, was that Ram Mohan Roy was not prepared to tolerate idolatry at all, indeed any religious symbolism which in any way diluted the idea of one God, and only one God for all of creation. Ram Mohan left home and wandered throughout India. He even went to Tibet and studied Buddhism. Finally, he came to Banaras, where he studied Sanskrit, the Vedas and the Upanishads, and he came to the conclusion that Vedanta reinforced his perception of monotheism. The entire heritage of man, it seemed to him, pointed to one root, one tree, whose branches shelter all of humanity under one God. Unlike Akbar, who had tried to create a Deen-e-Ilahi, a fusion of all religions, and failed, Ram Mohan brought to the problem reasoned, scientific, and erudite thinking. He wrote and published his first book, Tuhfat-ul-Muwahideen, a gift to monotheists, in Persian. The publication of his book resulted in the Muslims of Bengal claiming that Ram Mohan Roy was a Zabardast Maulvi, one of the ulema of Islam. Obviously, this concept of the unity of all religions leading to one God was unpalatable to Orthodox Hindus. Together with monotheism, Ram Mohan thought of social unity. At this troubled time in India's history, there entered into Ram Mohan Roy's life an English administrative officer, John Digby by name. John Digby replaced Thomas Woodford, with whom Ram Mohan had already discussed the European scientific outlook and the basic tenets of Western humanism. John Digby was amazed to discover that Ram Mohan Roy had already read Voltaire, Locke, Hume, and others. In his quiet way, Digby accepted as his equal his munshi, his head clerk, a man so keen to search after truth. Digby marveled that he had read all the major scriptures in the original, both in terms of monotheism and the various pantheons. During their discussions, by now they had become good friends, Digby encouraged Ram Mohan to translate Vedanta into Bengali and English. In the many conversations with Digby, often late into the night, when East and West together searched for truth, began to emerge the Ram Mohan Roy known to the world. As Max Muller was later to say, Ram Mohan Roy was the first to complete a connected life current between the East and the West. After Digby left for England, Ram Mohan Roy was alone. With considerable study and thought, he began to anticipate a solution to the problems of nationalism and communalism. He was sure that by eliminating religious barriers, India could achieve social progress. Although many people thought that Ram Mohan Roy was a dreamer, he pointed out to his contemporary Brahmins that it was they who suffered from dreams of errors. And he was so persuasive that he never needed to argue. What might have been debate became gentle conversation. And suddenly many of his contemporaries realized that here was a combination of belief and action. They listened to him in a circle which he founded, the Atmiya Sabha. Among his close associates and friends were Brindan Mitra, Braj Mohan Mazumdar, Nand Kishore Bose, and Dwarkanath Tagore, the grandfather of Rabindranath Tagore. He remembered the advice of his friend John Digby, write and again write. He translated the Vedantic philosophy into Bengali and English, from which several generations of Bengalis and Indians were to benefit. The English edition of Vedanta Sar created a profound impression in Europe and America, where the transcendentalists were greatly influenced. Indeed, some years later, Jeremy Bentham was to refer to Ram Mohan Roy as the most enlightened man of his time. In consonance with his sense of universality, Ram Mohan Roy introduced non-Indian words into the Bengali language. Purity of language was a bogey which he decried. Language changes as society changes, as man changes. Everything does not need to be in Sanskrit. The language of the village can be the language of a nation. Ram Mohan Roy was, in fact, the first writer of prose in Bengali. He wrote a grammar of the Bengali language. Much of Ram Mohan Roy's vision was embodied in Rabindranath. As Tagore himself said about Ram Mohan Roy, India's special genius has been to acknowledge the divine in human affairs, to offer hospitality to all that is imperishable in human civilization. Ram Mohan Roy fought against the barbarism of sati. He had seen his brother's widow forced onto the funeral pyre. Very few women immolated themselves willingly. The cruelty was agonizing. In his long and arduous struggle, he finally persuaded Lord Bentinck to ignore orthodox susceptibilities, and finally, in 1829, the custom of sati was abolished by law. Ram Mohan Roy fought for equal rights for women and for widow remarriage. Ram Mohan Roy was equally at home in Hebrew, Greek, Latin, Sanskrit, and Arabic. In the history of theology, such a linguist was very rare. Because of his conviction of monotheism, he also took issue with Christian missionaries. If God is one, why emphasize the Trinity? People will not understand so esoteric a concept. Why not speak of only one God? In the quiet precincts of a church in Calcutta, Ram Mohan Roy was reaching out to the Unitarians of America. Emerson and Thoreau were moved by Ram Mohan's works. The precepts of Jesus and an appeal to the Christian public were cogent arguments in favor of one God, shorn of dogma and ritual and superstition. Ram Mohan Roy was the only Indian of his time to realize completely the significance of the modern age. He knew that the ideal of human civilization does not lie in the isolation of independence, but in the brotherhood of interdependence. And if we want to introduce science into an educational system, then language is not important. It is the content that matters. He was the first Indian to establish modern scientific education in English in the country, which subsequently led to the colleges and universities which we enjoy today. The scientific and social outlook, however strong, did not take away from Ram Mohan Roy's awareness of political realities. He admired the American War of Independence, the French Revolution, the struggle of the Irish for freedom, or a state like Naples wanting freedom from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Greece wanting freedom from Turkey. Indeed, so significant were his views that they were incorporated in the Constitution of Spain. The Spanish Constitution specifically acknowledged the importance of Ram Mohan Roy as a citizen of the world. Who would have thought that 150 years ago there was a man who advocated the abolition of passports and the creation of a United Nations? Here was a man who believed in world government. Oh yes, he was aware of the international concern aroused by his ideas, but he realized that he must first put his ideas into practice at home. Are we going to be birds in a cage? All ideas lead to one God, the Creator. That is why Ram Mohan Roy is regarded as the founder of the Brahmo Samaj, a non-sectarian religion, inviting people to congregate without distinction of caste and creed, and with a single purpose, to worship the eternal. That he was called Raja is almost irrelevant. A khitab, a title, given to him by the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II, who appointed him his personal envoy to Great Britain. For he was, after all, the Raja of a great spiritual vision. He was the Raja of the search of the Indian people for freedom. He died on the 27th of September, 1833, at Bristol, in England. We might ask ourselves, what is the relevance of this biography to the India of today, in this India in which we suffer casteism, communalism, regionalism? Perhaps the answer is to be found not in the mouths of politicians, but in the words of Tagore in remembrance of Raja Ram Mohan Roy. If we do not observe perfect equity of human relationships, offering uncompromising fight to all forms and conventions, however ancient they may be in usage, which separate man and man, we shall be pitiful in our failure and shamed forever in the history of man.
19th century saw the British as absolute masters of the country. Never before in history had a trading company come to control an empire. The new conquerors, having amassed vast fortunes through corruption and coercion, lived a life of ease and extravagance. The necessity of a newspaper to expose administrative avarice was thought of by many, but it was James Augustus Hickey who started his Bengal Gazette from Calcutta on the 29th of January 1780. Hinting at corruption in high places, Hickey fired his salvos at the Governor General, Warren Hastings, and the Chief Justice, Sir Elijah Impey. Impey sentenced him to long periods of imprisonment for libel. His press confiscated, the paper ceased publication. Within a decade of Hickey's pioneering venture, several newspapers made their appearance. The possible growth of national consciousness among Indians haunted the government. This led Lord Wellesley to impose the notorious press regulations. Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who started a Bengali weekly, Sambad Kamudi, opposed the press regulations. James Silk Buckingham was another whose paper, the Calcutta Journal, dared to expose the maladministration of the company, for which he was expelled from India. During Lord William Bentinck's period, a number of vernacular newspapers were started by enterprising Parsis. One of them, the Rast Goftar, was edited by Dadabhai Nauroji. The Great Uprising of 1857 brought out the worst form of racialism in the Anglo-Indian press. It carried exaggerated and fanciful accounts of Indian brutality and cried for reprisals. When the Crown took over the company on the 1st of November 1858, several Anglo-Indian papers were founded. These papers mostly served the Crown and the British business interests. Significantly, Kipling worked for the Civil and Military Gazette, and Winston Churchill wrote for the Pioneer. In 1868, Sisir Kumar Ghosh started the Amrit Bazar Patrika, a Bengali weekly, to use his words, to rouse the people from their slumber. The Patrika's fearless exposures often led to head-on collisions with the government.
The Lieutenant Governor, Sir Ashley Eden, he was very angry with the Patrika. So he thought that he would speak to my father and make such arrangement that editorials could not be sent to the press straight away. They should first be shown to the Lieutenant Governor and then printed. My father went to Belvedere, where the Lieutenant Governor stayed, and he argued and argued. My father also argued against it. But finally, Lieutenant Governor said that, Shishir Babu, you are insulting me. I shall teach you a lesson. I shall send you out of Calcutta, bag and baggage, in 6 months' time. Because my father had said, does not your honor want that there should be a single honest newspaper in India? This went home. And the Lieutenant Governor went to Lord Lytton, then Viceroy, and brought out this, the Vernacular Press Act.
Several vernacular papers closed down. Amrit Bazar Patrika switched overnight to English to circumvent the act. During this period, Sardar Dayal Singh Majithia launched the Tribune from Lahore. The Hindu appeared from Madras. Its first editor, G. Subramanya Iyer, was to emerge as a great journalist.
The role he played in politics could best be understood when it is known that it was he who moved the first resolution of the Indian National Congress at its very first session in Bombay in 1885. And from that time onwards, the editors of the Hindu have been in some way or the other concerned very closely with the experiences of the national movement. Magnitude of that task could be understood by the fact that they had to confront not only the establishment of the day, but also the Anglo-Indian press, which was propped up by the British rulers to support them.
Despite all these odds, national newspapers began to appear in most parts of the country. When, in response to Alan Octavian Hume's call, the Indian National Congress was formed on the 28th of December 1885, it heralded a renaissance in which the press fully participated. Tilak was the first to realize the power of the press. He used his papers, the Kesari and Maratha, to attack government's apathy and exploitation. In 1897, he was sentenced to 18 months rigorous imprisonment, the first conviction of a political journalist. The massive political agitation that followed the Bengal partition in 1905 was supported by the entire national press. Surendranath Banerjee and Aurobindo Ghosh kept the agitation alive in the columns of Bengali and Bande Mataram. Amrit Bazar Patrika indignantly remarked, "Lord Curzon has thrown 60 millions of Bengalis into a paroxysm of grief. He has 72,000 British soldiers to help him." Lala Lajpat Rai, whose political career started with his militant weekly, the Punjabi, was arrested on a trumped-up charge and deported to Mandalay. The ferocity of what Gokhale called the sedition hunt reached its peak when Lord Minto clamped the Newspaper Act on the 8th of June 1908. Innumerable newspapers throughout the country ceased publication. Subramania Bharati, the Tamil poet-journalist, crossed over to Pondicherry to escape arrest. Tilak was deported to Mandalay to serve a 6-year sentence. Meanwhile, the Anglo-Indian press flourished. In Bombay, the Times of India moved into an impressive building. Dubbed the Old Woman of Boribandar by Benjamin Guy Horniman, it was to face competition from a newcomer, the Bombay Chronicle. Established in 1913 by Firoz Shah Mehta with Horniman as its editor, the Chronicle sent shivers down many a bureaucratic spine. Annie Besant, through her papers, The Commonweal and New India, waged a battle for home rule. "We claim liberty, not favor," she wrote. On the 16th of June, 1917, she was interned to nationwide protest. The editor of the Comrade, Maulana Muhammad Ali, and Abul Kalam Azad of Al-Hilal were also interned without trial. The Rowlatt Act of 1919 added insult to injury. Peaceful protests met with brutal repression. British troops roamed the streets to humiliate, to terrorize. On the 13th of April 1919, in Amritsar, was committed a massacre most foul. In connivance with the Anglo-Indian press, the government's attempts to suppress the news of the Jallianwala Bagh tragedy were foiled by the Bombay Chronicle, which published a detailed report. For this, Horniman was deported to England and censorship clamped on the paper. To mark its protest, the editorial column of the Chronicle was left blank. Severe penalties awaited many others. Kalinath Rai, the editor of the Tribune was sentenced to 2 years rigorous imprisonment.
Kalinath Rai, who served a very long period as editor of the paper, suffered a great deal during his tenure. The paper was closed down during the independence movement for a period. Kalinath Rai was sentenced to imprisonment and a fine. During the martial law days, he even had to crawl as a punishment. Punishment did not deter him from doing his duty. In fact, Kalinath Rai became a byword in courage and determination.
Gandhi, who came into journalism with Young India and Navjivan, said, Plassey laid the foundation of the British Empire. Amritsar has shaken it. The non-cooperation movement he launched in 1921 convulsed the country. The Secretary of State, Edwin Montagu, advised Indians not to challenge the most determined people in the world. Birkenhead boasted of Britain's hard fibre. Gandhi took up the challenge in an editorial in Young India. No empire intoxicated with the red wine of power and plunder of weaker races has lived long. For his seditious writings, Gandhi was sentenced to 6 years imprisonment. The non-cooperation movement also influenced the pattern of the press. Several newspapers representing various views, the Liberal, the Swaraj Party and the Congress, were launched in different parts of the country. The vernacular press in particular was making its mark. In 1924 appeared the Hindustan Times, the capital's first national daily, with K.M. Panikar as its editor. National newspapers unanimously condemned the all-British Simon Commission, mobilizing public opinion for its boycott. Simon, go back, protested tens of thousands regardless of arrest, lathi charge and firing. Jawaharlal Nehru and Gobind Vallabh Pant received baton blows during these demonstrations. Lala Lajpat Rai's death was hastened by this assault. When Gandhi started on his unparalleled Dandi March on the 12th of March 1930 to break the Salt Law, the government's reaction was fierce and punitive, particularly towards the press. 67 newspapers ceased publication and 55 presses were closed. Several editors were arrested. Cyclo-styled underground newspapers made their appearance. Following the Gandhi-Irwin Pact, the Indian Press Ordinance was withdrawn on the 6th of March 1931. It proved short-lived. While Gandhi was away in London to attend the Round Table Conference, Irwin's successor, Willingdon, followed a policy of repression. Gandhi was arrested on return and the press gagged once again. One of the worst hit was the Free Press Journal and its editor S. Sadanand.
In 1930, he started the Free Press Journal, which became a sensation. It was a revolutionary paper, first of its kind in India. Big, bold headlines, 48-point black, very brash headlines sometimes. But from the very start, he began to fall foul of the British government. First, he had to pay a fine of 6,000 rupees, or 3 months imprisonment. Later on, he was called upon to pay a security deposit of 6,000 rupees. And then this became a regular pattern. 6,000, 10,000, another 10,000, then 20,000. In all, about 70,000 rupees were paid by him as security deposit. When the Congress government came to power in India, he was asked by the then Chief Minister, Mr. B.G. Kher, whether he would like to get the security deposit back. He was too proud to ask for it.
Jawaharlal Nehru's involvement with journalism began with the National Herald, which represented left-of-centre Congress views.
About the same time, we find the emergence of what can really be called a left press. There was the Congress Socialist Party's paper called Congress Socialist, Independent India started by M.N. Roy, then the communists who were still an illegal party, they had the National Front. The two-way communication in these papers. On one side, naturally, these papers focused more and more news about the peasantry, the working class, the radical student movement. On the other hand, they carried the message of independence to all these segments of society.
The menacing shadow of fascism was lengthening across Europe. Hitler's armies marched into Prague, then Poland. Not long after, the Battle of Britain. Simultaneously, Lord Linlithgow, the Viceroy, took India to war by proclamation without consulting Indian national leaders. Censorship of the press was tightened under the Defence of India rules. Gandhi's call on the 8th of August 1942 to the nation to either free India or die in the attempt brought cruel and atrocious reprisals. The government suppressed 96 newspapers and journals and imposed heavy penalties on many more. But the press could not be kept down for long. It highlighted the tragedy of the Bengal famine, in which more than 3 million died. The Royal Indian Navy mutiny, which hastened the departure of the British from India, was flashed by the Free Press Journal and Blitz and some others. The 40s was a period of great upheaval and turmoil. Dawn, the official mouthpiece of the Muslim League, called for the partition of the country. The two-nation theory resulted in the worst ever communal riots in the country. The national press, calling for communal harmony, vigorously opposed the division of the country.
Bombay Chronicle was staunchly against partition. Not once but several times Mr. Brailby wrote very strong editorials against it himself. Mr. Brailby went to a meeting at which there was some discussion over these communal matters. And the local Muslim League toughs demanded that he should leave the hall and should not be present. But Mr. Brailby, once he had decided to speak, he was very firm on it. So he did speak, and against the communalists. And at the end of the meeting, there was one man who came from the back and stabbed him. But luckily for Mr. Brailby, he was always wearing a very loose sherwani. So this dagger hit the sherwani and slit it into two parts. And other people came and saved him.
Out of the blood and tears of millions, a new nation was born.
Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not wholly or in full measure, but very substantially.
In this long and arduous journey, the Indian press has played a proud and dignified role, shirking no responsibility, fearing no master, sparing no sacrifice. Many outstanding men have filled its ranks. Their pen was mightier than any sword.
indeed in these modern days of the 19th century, Kali Yuga has almost dawned. Oh my God, my dharma is getting corrupt. Save my society, save my religion. Look at this atrocity. My sister is a widow. If my grandfather was alive, she would have been righteously cremated with her husband's body. A death of such glory and dignity. But now, she has run away somewhere.
Sir, Professor Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar has propagated the idea of a remarriage. You know, Veerasalingam has started a home for child widows. I found your sister there.
Oh, Shiva, Shiva, what a dirty idea. Remarriage for a widow? What an unholy idea to have all widows in one place.
These Hindus are losing their religion, getting corrupted by an alien English education. Hence, my Muslim brothers, let us not send our children to modern schools.
Sir, my son is a student of the Aligarh College, recently started by our Syed Ahmad Khan. I think all of us should give a better modern education to our children. Let us not get left behind.
That is all right. Let people of other religions do what they like. But my son, you cannot change.
But Father, our Saint Ramalinga Adigal believes in the universal brotherhood beyond all castes, creed, race, religion and nationality. He feels all men are children of God, whether Hindu, Muslim or Christian.
Well, it is a sin to cross the seas. I will neither go out nor accept the aliens. How can all these mlechas be equal to us?
Father, Swami Vivekananda himself has crossed the oceans to talk about our religion in the West. I am more than convinced by his vision of religion. He says he does not want a religion which cannot wipe a widow's tears nor bring a morsel of food to the orphans. Father, we have only 4 more years to see the end of the 19th century. A new era is to begin. Professor Kave in Pune has just married a widow. I also intend to marry a widow and give new life to a poor girl.
Let us go to every holy river and pond in this country. We must have a dip in the Ganges to get rid of these sinful thoughts of yours. You are not serious, I am sure.
I'm sorry, Father. I'm quite serious. Swami Dayananda has advised us to give up this religion of rituals and holy rivers. I go back to the Vedic religion and find no support for this mechanical counting of the beads. We all have the right to learn science as well as the Vedas. This is a thrilling time, Father. A group of nationalists have formed the Indian National Congress 10 years ago. Gopalakrishna Gokhale has founded the Servants of India Society. I'm sorry, Father, you cannot agree with me, but I wish to be a servant of India at this historic time.
Unlike the Upanishads, several of which are in the form of a dialogue between student and teacher, reflecting a spirit of academic freedom, unlike the tradition of the ancient rishis, in which open-minded inquiry and interrogation was part of spiritual sadhana, the early 19th century in India was dominated by superstition when custom overruled curiosity. And then a period of great renaissance started in the mid-19th century, a period which perhaps has yet to reach its zenith. Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Henry Louis de Rosio, Keshav Chandra Sen, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Swami Dayananda Saraswati, Syed Ahmad Khan, and Ramalinga Adigal were among those who spearheaded a resurgent reformist movement of Renaissance during the 19th century.
A Telugu Pandit by profession, Kandukuri Veerasalingam was a social reformer, educationist, and one of the makers of modern Telugu literature.
A pioneer in the campaign against child marriages, he initiated the practice of widow remarriage. Veerashalingam started an institution for the rehabilitation of child widows in Rajamundry. He conducted Vivekavardhani and other journals to fight against corruption in public services and other malpractices in society. The Widows' Home and Girls' Schools, founded by him in the late 19th century, continue to render their service today in Rajamundry, Andhra Pradesh. The Eravas of Kerala were originally engaged in toddy tapping and other traditional occupations and were classified untouchables. Sri Narayana Guru founded Sri Narayana Dharma Paripalana Yogam, under the auspices of which many schools and colleges were started for the benefit of this community. He also did his best to educate the people of Kerala on the evils of untouchability and helped to propagate the concept of social equality. Visiting him in his ashram, Rabindranath Tagore wrote, "I have never come across one who is spiritually greater than Sri Narayana Guru." Guruji categorically declared that he found no support for the cruel practice of untouchability in Hindu scriptures, and he worked tirelessly for one caste, one religion, one God for man. In terms of action-oriented social reform with personal involvement, the contribution of Keshav Karve remains unmatched. Born in 1858 in Ratnagiri district, Maharashtra, Karve was a pioneer of women's education. A graduate of Bombay University, he started his career as a lecturer in mathematics at the Ferguson College, Pune. Particularly interested in the rehabilitation of widows, he married a widow himself and started the Hindu Widows' Home in 1896. He founded the Mahila Vidyalaya, which grew into the present SNDT Women's University. Maharshi Karve, as he was known, lived in this modest room all his life till the age of 104. Although his fame and his institutions had grown, he led a simple life in this modest cottage, where he started a widow's home in the last years of the 19th century. Recipient of Bharat Ratna, Maharshi Karve lived to see a changed India in his lifetime. In this historic picture, we find Karve and his bride, with other members of the progressive group, even as eyebrows were raised against them in obscurantist circles in 1896. Different nationalist, reformist, and resurgent threads were brought together in 1885 in the shape of the Indian National Congress. While the Congress had political objectives, Justice Ranade founded the Social Conference at the same time as a social counterpart. Ranade believed in man conquering the world through universal, undifferentiated love. He demanded a change from constraint to freedom, from credulity to faith, from status to contract, from authority to reason, from unorganized to organized life, from a blind fatalism to a sense of human dignity. Ranade declared, "You cannot have a good social system when you find yourself low in the scale of political rights, nor can you be fit to exercise political rights and privileges unless your social system is based on reason and justice. You cannot have a good economic system when your social arrangements are imperfect. If your religious ideals are low and groveling, you cannot succeed in social, economic, or political spheres." An ardent follower of Ranade, Gopalakrishna Gokhale, founded the Servants of India Society in Pune, dedicated to the service of the nation and living up to its name. On this hilltop in Pune, a group of dedicated youngsters took the oath to serve the nation. The Servants of India Society became a focal point of social reform and selfless service. This banyan tree was witness to the daily meditations and arduous service of a great son of India, Gokhale, whose influence spread far and wide, spreading aerial roots. In this house where Gokhale lived, a young man of great vision met him, a meeting of giants of two generations. Yes, Mahatma Gandhi visited him here soon after his return from South Africa. Meanwhile, a dominant and forceful voice of Hindu reform was heard, that of Swami Vivekananda, a brilliant saint who brought the message of modern Hinduism with the impact of a worldwide spiritual force. Born in a prosperous house in central Calcutta, he came under the spell of Swami Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. His universalism was deeply rooted in the specific message of Vedanta. Vivekananda was a saint, but not a recluse. To him, the ideal of Advaita Vedanta was one of living identification of man with all other men, with all other living things. He declared that so long as millions live in hunger and ignorance, I hold everyone a traitor, who, having been educated at their expense, pays not the least heed to them. It is an insult to starving people to offer them religion, an insult to a starving man to teach him metaphysics. For he was convinced that to serve man was to serve God. His nationalist teachings were meant to awaken Indians. Naturally, independence was an important goal. He said to his countrymen, "So, give up being a slave. For the next 50 years, this alone shall be our keynote. This, our great Mother India." Founding the Ramakrishna Mission here, on the banks of the Hooghly River, he said, "We as a nation have lost our individuality, and this is the cause of all the mischief in India. We have to give back to the nation its lost individuality and raise the masses." A champion of religion, he never thought that science was an impediment to religion or reason to faith. The scientific attitude for him was as valid in religion as in secular knowledge. He believed that the spirit of scientific inquiry was very much in evidence in the rich intellectual activities of the ancient Hindus, and that it was necessary to revive the same in order to purify Hinduism of its superstitions. A political revolutionary turned mystic, Sri Aurobindo, guided a band of Indians to pursue a detached path of spiritualism combined with intense national fervor. While many other thinkers of the time were attempting a mere synthesis of Eastern and Western philosophies, Sri Aurobindo created a well-knit, brilliantly argued, comprehensive and unique philosophical system. While many poets were inspired by the milieu of the new Indian thinking, two men sang their way into the people's hearts and became harbingers of India's resurgence. Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore and Subramanya Bharati had a poetic vision far ahead of their times. Bharati not only sang the glory of India's liberated woman, but was also the first poet outside the Soviet orbit in the whole world to sing the glory of the Russian Revolution and the new socialist order. In the higher realms of Indian thought, it is difficult to completely isolate the spiritual and intellectual leaders of the Renaissance from the political leaders of the freedom struggle. The greatest symbol of intellectual and spiritual Renaissance was Mahatma Gandhi himself, who stood for the elevation of the poorest of the poor, the freedom of the most humble and downtrodden, not limiting his vision of freedom to a mere transfer of political power from one race to another, but expanding his horizon to freedom in economic, intellectual, and spiritual terms, opposed as he was to all kinds of slavery. The national movement not only took upon itself the task of liberating India from Western political rule, but liberating the peasant from the zamindar, the woman from enslavement by man, the untouchable from enslavement by high caste, resulting in a struggle that was multidimensional, moral, ethical, economic, political, and spiritual. Even before performing his great role of bridging the days of India's struggle for freedom with those of a triumphant new voyage of discovering her future destiny as an independent land, Jawaharlal Nehru declared from his prison cell, "India is a geographical and economic entity, a cultural unit amidst diversity, a bundle of contradictions held together by strong but invisible threads. Overwhelmed again and again, her spirit was never conquered. And today, when she appears to be the plaything of a proud conqueror, she remains unsubdued and unconquered. About her, there is the elusive quality of a legend of long ago. Some enchantment seems to have held her mind. She is a myth and an idea, a dream and a vision, and yet very real and present and pervasive. There are terrifying glimpses of dark corridors which seem to lead back to primeval night. But also, there is the fullness and warmth of the day about her. Shameful and repellent she is occasionally, perverse and obstinate, sometimes even a little hysterical, this lady with a past. But she is very lovable, and some of her children cannot forget her wherever they go or whatever strange fate befalls them. India will find herself again when freedom opens out new horizons, and the future will then fascinate her far more than the immediate past of frustration and humiliation. She will go forward with confidence, rooted in herself and yet eager to learn from others and cooperate with them.